For those of you joining over on YouTube, I'm getting ready to go live yet again over on TikTok. This will be my seventh live in a row, actually. Don't know how many more days it's going to continue to be a thing, but going live, going to talk about politics and stuff. We're going live now. Going to take a little bit for people to start getting in the room. So as we wait for people, got some breaking news today. Elise Stefanik is going to be tagged to be the UN ambassador, which opens a seat potentially to pick up for the Democrats with a special election. Going to screw over the Republicans with a thin majority. Also heard Marco Rubio could be Secretary of State, which again, we'll see who ends up running. Some speculation he may be a Republican pick for 2028. For those of you joining, we are talking news, politics, things like that. Got some news today. A couple big positions. Elise Stefanik sounds like going to be the ambassador to the UN in the Trump administration, which is an interesting pick because that would mean we have an open seat that would have to have a special election, and that would mean that the already thin majority we are looking at potentially Republicans having would be even more narrow, which means they are going to have to work even that much harder to pass anything until that special election is held. And the Democrats could pick up a seat, although her seat is safe +9, safe Republicans +9. So, as we're waiting there, we'll see what happens there. Also, Marco Rubio out of Florida, Senator Marco Rubio, sounds like will be tagged as Secretary of State. Some people are suggesting he might be a potential 2028 presidential pick for the Republican Party. So we'll see what happens on that front. I mean, why else would he not be a senator? Why would he give up his position in the Senate to become a Secretary of State if he's not planning to try to run in 2028? Don't know how well he would do. And if he would be able to captivate the MAGA movement, the MAGA base, the same way as Donald Trump has, because they really don't have a deep bench. They got to do whatever they can to, keep the base going if they're going to want to have a chance in 2028. Now, I believe that Democrats are going to retake the presidency in 2028, and it's going to be the beginning of Democratic run. Yeah, I am talking about the MAGA Republicans base only in that they don't have a deep enough bench to actually run anybody. That's a good thing for Democrat and left-leaning people. There isn't really anybody that can captivate them to the level that Donald Trump did. And Abram says, as a special education teacher, so scared for the future. Yeah, I am too, although I think abolishing the Department of Education would require Congress, and I don't know if they can do that as part of reconciliations and get around the filibuster, or if they would need the filibuster to start eliminating cabinet positions. They may have to get past the filibuster to do that, and if they do, they're going to be in trouble. Republicans aren't going to be able to get it done, which is a good thing for everybody else. Paul Smith says next election is going to be Democrats and it's going to be a Democratic president. 2028, yeah. I firmly believe, I made this comparison the last couple of days. If you look at what happened in 1929 when the stock market crashed with the only Iowan president ever, Hoover, he sat back and watched it burn and said, well, it's the market. It'll bounce back. It'll fix itself. Did nothing 4 years later, we got FDR, and for 20 years after that, except for 2 years, Democrats had control of both houses of Congress and the presidency. And those 2 years were during the Truman administration. And I believe it was during actually Truman's term, not the term that he finished for FDR. Thank you, Paul. Glad you like my platform. Just try to look it over, see what I can see, and call it like I see it. And I admit when I'm wrong too. I mean, going into the election, I said everything was on board. I thought for sure Kamala Harris was going to win. I figured she was going to win by 10 million popular and a bigger electoral margin than Joe Biden. Everything was looking that way. Now, whether or not recounts prove that, I have no idea. But that's what I expected. And that's because everything was leaning that way. Peter got scared. Peter who? Don't know if they did cheat. If they did, I hope it gets brought to light and they find things. I know I've seen a lot of. Oh, yeah, people, Paul, that makes more sense. I'm seeing a lot of things where people are reading into this or reading into that this person said or that person said and saying, well, something's happening. Until they announce something, I'm going to assume nothing's happening. In part, I don't want to get my hopes up and get destroyed again because I clinged on to hope on guesses and full blood test. What do you mean, Sofa King? But well, that's the thing. What we don't know is some people are saying Starlink had something to do with it, software had something to do with it. Yeah, Donald Trump did say he could have it ended right after becoming elected. Hasn't happened yet. Oh, well, I can see. Uh, Says tabulation machines not connected to the internet. I've heard that. But then I've also heard some people try to say that there was something to do with the data not getting uploaded from one place to the other or something like that. Again, it's all speculation. Um, and if there is something, I'm waiting for something official. It looks weird, is what I'm going to say. It looks odd. And I've been saying since the election was called, it's one of, Democrats have to figure out what went wrong. Whether it was something fishy or was it just there were protest voters and people who did not vote at the top of the ticket for whatever reason. Did they not vote for Kamala Harris because of how she became the nominee? Did they not vote for her because of how Joe Biden was pushed out of the race? Was it because of the two wars ongoing? That even though we're not part of, they are involving allies of ours, and we are sending aid and funding. Was it the 2 weeks or so of being out campaigning with Liz Cheney and being too close to some Republicans? Did that turn some Democrats off and say, hey, we're not doing this? We're not voting because we wanted to vote for a Democrat, not a Republican. And were they worried that Kamala Harris was going to be too far to the right and try to include too many Republicans? Don't know. Those are all potentials for what could have happened. And now we just got to get through it and figure out what happened, how. Don't have anything to do with Democrat or Republican. It's policy. Could be policies. Hang on, they're going a little fast here. Jeff said Trump said before the ballots went through there was fraud, then he won. Um, Yeah, but see, that's how Donald Trump is. Everything that he, everything with Donald Trump, if he tries something or if he tries to win something and he doesn't win, he has always screamed that it was cheated, it was rigged to get him. And he did that in 2016 with the Iowa caucus. He lost the Iowa caucus to, what was it, Ted Cruz, and he screamed and yelled that the Iowa caucus was rigged against him, and he should have actually won. How many times was he up for different awards for The Apprentice and he didn't win? Oh, that was rigged against him. He's done this forever. Him saying it was rigged, he was laying the groundwork ahead of the election to say it was rigged in case, because he expected to lose. Donald Trump expected to lose this race. And I don't know if he actually wanted to win. I don't know that Donald Trump wanted to win this race. Um, Saying she got more votes than Obama. 2020 is the only election that's odd. Well, remember there were two things with 2020 that were contributing factors. We had the pandemic, which a lot of people were still dealing with the effects of. You were dealing with um, people dying by the tens of thousands weekly. You were doing mail-in ballots. Every state changed the rules about how you got your ballot. A lot of states mailed you a registration card. You mail that back. They mailed you an absentee form. You fill that out, mail it back, and you got your ballot. And I am not a teacher. I was told way back when I should have been a history teacher. Never pursued education. But 2020, I think that was the big reason 2020's numbers were so high. Between the effects of the pandemic and everything being mailed to everybody, you didn't have to do anything to go exercise your right to vote. You just could vote because you had the ballot in your mailbox when you got home one day. You went, oh, fill, mail it off. You could do it in 10 minutes, and you didn't have to think about it. You didn't even have to leave your house to mail it back. It was all right there. You just let your mailman know that you had outgoing mail, he'd take it with him. Easy. And then states changed the rules. Like here in Iowa, they took away 9 days of early voting, early in-person voting, and they made it so the Secretary of State could not mail everybody that was a registered voter an absentee ballot. You had to go and apply and do other things to get your absentee ballot, and you had to seek it out on your own. Do I? Hmm. But that was the gist of it. You had to go seek everything out yourself this time where it wasn't mailed to you. That hurt turnout because at least some, I'm not going to put all of the discrepancy between Joe Biden's vote count and Kamala Harris's vote count on it, but at least some of that number is from people being too lazy to seek out to vote or changing the rules on how easy it was to vote, etc. And you had some ballots in blue-leaning states that did get destroyed. A couple ballot boxes got burned, things like that. And I don't know if they got everybody that was affected a new ballot and was able to remedy the whole situation. But again, I'm not putting all of the blame for that in just the one thing. But started out, we were talking about Marco Rubio is going to be the Secretary of State in the incoming Trump administration. Now, why would Marco Rubio give up a Senate seat in what appears to be reliably red state where he could probably get reelected again no problem. Why would he become Secretary of State? Some people think he's going to be running in 2028. That's possible. He could be a potential Republican uh, candidate in 2028. And, if the Democrat, because it's going to probably take, well, wait a minute. Is Florida one of the states that has the governor just appoints a replacement senator? I'm not sure. Depending on how that works, there could be a replacement appointed until 2026, and Marco Rubio's seat could be up for special election in 26 if he's not already up for re-election. I don't remember when his term is up. But if the Democrats work hard, maybe they flip that seat. Now, do I believe they could flip a seat in Florida? Possible. I thought there was a chance they could have flipped Rick Scott's seat. I don't know why they didn't. I thought it didn't make any sense that Rick Scott wins re-election in Florida, but even though it didn't pass because it didn't cross 60%, that you had 57% of voters approving the abortion initiative measure in Florida. Those two things don't typically go hand in hand. Just like Missouri passed their abortion amendment, but then voted for Josh Hawley. Those two things don't make sense to me. That's one of the reasons why going into the election, I said, that I thought Kamala Harris was going to win. And, when you're looking at abortion amendments across the nation, things like that, it looked good for Kamala Harris. But I think part of it is they got lost in their own messaging. Republicans are very good at short single sentence messaging of what they're going to do. Republicans give you a 10-page dissertation, or Democrats do. They tell you, 18 steps in how they're going to do everything, and people still say that's not enough detail. And Republicans can come around and say something like, I'm going to build a wall and make Mexico pay for it, and people cheer. Don't explain how that's actually going to work or how they're going to make Mexico pay for it. But it seems to work. Democrats are horrible at messaging. And they have been for a long time. I did a TikTok on it earlier, seeing some videos about people not realizing that Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act are exactly the same thing. That because the Democrats lost the messaging battle, in, 2012, when they passed Obamacare, that's why people are still confused about the two things. That when they say they're going to repeal Obamacare, that means the Affordable Care Act. I've seen numerous videos about people saying, well, if they get rid of Obamacare, I'll be fine because I'm covered under the Affordable Care Act. They're the same thing. Now that it's been called the Affordable Care Act and those things are actually showing to work, people like it. But when you ask them how they like Obamacare, they've got a negative idea of what Obamacare is, and then they want it repealed, even though they don't entirely know what it is, because Democrats are bad at messaging. So Democrats have to work on their messaging going forward for the next 2 years going into the midterms. Speaking on Obamacare, a lot of companies right now are in the middle of open enrollment, and that's going to, affect people. Too many people cross-voted. How did North Carolina vote for a Democratic governor but vote for Trump? Yeah, that's a good question. That doesn't make any sense. They voted for every position down ballot for Democrat, all statewide elected officials in North Carolina, except president. And we've talked about it several times in the last few days. Is it messaging? Is it how Joe Biden stepped aside? Is it they just didn't like Kamala Harris? Was it protest votes because of both wars going on? I mean, there was some of that going on for sure. There's a lot of factors involved there. And, Democrats have to figure out what exactly happened. If they can break the messaging down and start talking to people. I've seen some people say that they're mad because they feel like, even though Kamala Harris was talking about things that would help the everyday person, they didn't feel like that was the big part of their message, especially when they were talking about the economy. They were talking about nationwide unemployment, inflation numbers nationwide being down, and talking about, things on the nationwide scale, and talking about the stock market and using the stock market as a reference point for how good the economy is. And people are saying, but I don't have any stocks. How is that helping me? Um, so for those of you joining, we've been talking politics, news, the election, all of it. Just trying to get a handle on what happened, where we go from here. Some of the news of the day dealing with uh, everything, talking about how the governor cheated. What governor? What governor, Michaela? Um, Talking about how Elise Stefanik could be the ambassador to the UN under the Trump administration. You know, if that's the case, well, that's a seat. They're not going to have a very big margin if they control the House. We're still waiting for them to finalize the call for the House of Representatives. They're not going to have a very big Republican margin in the House. And they can't get along right now anyway. So, with them not being able to get along, and they pull up one more seat out of that race until there's a special election and somebody fills that seat, they're going to be hurting for one more vote. That's just one less person they can afford to lose in their, in their votes in the House. They just don't have the votes that, in order to get a lot of what they wanted to do, especially the stuff that's in Project 2025 that is going to require Congress, they needed to have the House by 40 or 50 seats, and they're not going to have that. They're not going to have the Senate by 10 seats. They may only have 53 seats. They are not going to jettison the filibuster for most of Project 2025. That's just not going to happen. And the filibuster is going to be one of the things that's going to be helping keep things from actually happening. Because congressional Republicans or congressional politicians, they like power more than a lot of things. And, as scary as a lot of what can happen in the next several years can be, there's at least some guardrails in place. And they're going to be limited in what they can actually get accomplished because of their margins. And if things go as bad as they could, Democrats take both chambers of Congress in 26, and then Trump's really not going to get anything accomplished beyond that. I mean, some of the most egregious things they want to do is either going to take the Supreme Court making some very, very shitty decisions, or it would take constitutional amendments, and they really don't have the numbers for constitutional amendments. Because they don't have 67% of both chambers of Congress to get an amendment to the states, and they don't have majorities in 38 state legislatures to pass everything. It's just not going to happen. Things like ending birthright citizenship. One of the things they would have to do to end birthright citizenship is get a case back to the Supreme Court and have the Supreme Court redefine what is meant by the 14th Amendment when it says any person born in the United States or subject to its jurisdiction means. Or is it any person born in the United States and subject to its jurisdiction? One of the two. But the point is, it's typically been held with birthright citizenship. If you are born within the confines of the United States, on any of their property, effectively, any of the land that is considered United States, you automatically have American citizenship. And they would have to go to the Supreme Court and have them redefine what that means. Does that mean you have to have, parentage of an American citizen or something like that? And then it becomes troubling. But beyond that, now you start creating other issues, because one of the things by saying that, one of the reasons they're able to arrest, detain, and deport undocumented immigrants is, it's always been held that anybody inside the United States, unless they are specifically granted diplomatic immunity for one reason or another, is subject to their jurisdiction. You're subject to our laws. So, would they be trying to make some other case? Well, then that becomes a whole nother thing. And I just don't think Supreme Court gets into that can of worms. Same with denaturalizing people. If they're going to start denaturalizing citizens, okay, they may be able to get by in the courts with a few people at a time, but to do it on any sort of mass scale to get rid of the numbers of people that they are talking about, they would need something through Congress, and I just don't see that happening. I just don't think they would have the numbers to pass it through Congress. So maybe I'm wrong, and I guess we'll find out. I've been wrong before. I'll be wrong again. I'll admit when I'm wrong. But I'm looking to what's there and hoping for some kind of guardrails to protect us. Let's see. For those of you joining in, we are talking news and politics. If you want to, discuss anything, obviously drop it in the comments. I try to read as many of them as I can. And kind of just go whichever direction the conversation leads. I know some people are getting maybe excited about the recount idea, or the idea that there's something in the works, that they're recounting this state, they're recounting that state. And I've heard some rumblings, but they're really not talking about it in the media. That's all going on kind of behind closed doors. If there is anything significant, I'm waiting till whatever comes out with those. If there are already court cases. Trump says women will be thinking about abortion while in office. You mean like if they were elected? They won't be able to stop the upcoming midterms. So they wouldn't all sabotage their careers. Exactly. That's the thing. In order to change how elections work, they would need to pass a constitutional amendment. They don't have 67% of both chambers of Congress. They don't have 38 states. And there wouldn't be enough people willing to even attempt to vote with it because they know they got to be reelected in 2 years. They know they're not close enough to having the numbers required, so they're not going to risk attempting it. I've said numerous times, congressional politicians like power, and they don't like ceding power. That's why right now, for the last 20-ish years, Congress has never gone on recess. They've been on recess and said, oh yeah, we're taking 6 weeks off. But they hold what's called a pro forma session every 3 days. Because if they don't, while they're out, the sitting president can make recess appointments, and that person would have, depending on when they are made, until the end of the next Congress, or till the beginning of the next Congress to get Congress to approve those people. And that could take up to 2 years. And Congress doesn't want to cede that kind of power to the president to be able to make their own appointments, even though it's in the Constitution. So what they do is they hold a pro forma session, and you have one member every time, one a week, one every 3 days, goes in, who doesn't have anything else to do that week. They show up, they gavel into the Senate, they gavel into the House, and they say, okay, since we're all here, does anybody object to us going, closing out for the day? We'll see you in 3 days. There's no one there to object. They gavel back out, and they assume everybody's there. They do that to prevent recess appointments, because there was a Supreme Court case about what that would require. And basically, they've come to the consensus that as long as they do a session like that every 3 days, they're never considered in recess. Plus, if they were to go in recess, that is something that could be filibustered by the Democrats, and they would have to also get the House to agree to a recess for the Senate to be gone, and it's just not going to happen. It's going to be a safeguard to prevent Donald Trump from being able to do recess appointments. And the only reason presidents typically use a recess appointment is to get around somebody that they know the Senate would have an issue with. Because if they can't pass a Senate confirmation, especially when it's their own party, they know how bad that person might be. So yeah, we will have elections here coming up in 2 years. We're going to have midterms. Democrats are going to start getting candidates ready. We're probably going to have some special elections between here and there. And again, special elections are their own beast. Especially with such a narrow margin as what could be in the House. If multiple House members are up for grabs that get pulled into the Trump administration, well, those seats could be winnable by Democrats, even in what are typically safe Republican districts, because of the fact it's a special election and because of people wanting to put some kind of a check against the president. That is another thing that could happen. I mean, we'll have to see what the turnout looks like if and when these special elections do happen. We've been talking for several days about what happened. There's a lot of things that happened as far as why the election went the way it did, outside of any potential conspiracy theory and cheating, that the Democrats are going to have to look at. Talked about it several times the last several days. Did the Democrats open their umbrella too far wide and try to appeal to the Republicans too far and alienate some of the left-leaning Democrats who said, well, that's too far right for me, I want to go left? Was it the two wars going on? I know there were some people that said not going to vote for anybody associated with Genocide Joe. And, that's just silly, because Joe Biden's not the one actively in the war. It's a different country. And he was doing everything he could to support our allies while also trying to bring an end to it. But, that could be part of it. I know some people were pissed about how Joe got pushed aside. That was very public. That was, he got dragged through the mud by certain members of Congress. And, they made it, some very high-ranking Democrats made their feelings very well known, very publicly. The media didn't help. The media running 3 weeks of daily stories of, is Joe going to drop out? Or this person says Joe should drop out. This person says Joe should drop out. Is Joe going anywhere? We've got a problem with the media in this country. I try to avoid any of the mainstream media because of the issues with it. The media is not our friend. They are not working in our best interests anymore. And I'm not talking about just places like Fox News that openly admits their entertainment. I'm talking about the mainstream media that used to be rather reliable, places like MSNBC, CNN. They're more about putting out something that gets you tuned in and making it appear like a horse race and making it appear like it's even. This race never should have been even. A lot of us that were watching are getting most of our news from places like TikTok and other sources and looking into it ourselves. We were seeing all of the egregious stuff that Donald Trump was talking about doing and the things that were coming out. And then the mainstream media wasn't really running with it as a story nearly as much as it should have been. I think if people were more informed, there would have been a lot of people voting for him. Seeing all kinds of stuff about people looking up where and what people are Googling. And they're Googling, what's a tariff? What's Project 2025? Can I change my vote? How do tariffs work? Things like that. They're looking it up now because they're starting to see effects of it or whatever. Fred from Chicago here. Good to hear you on Rational Boomer. We should do a show on RB together. Nice to see you, Fred. For those of you in the live, if you don't know, I do guest star routinely over on the Rational Boomer podcast. And yeah, if reach out to Mike, just let him know you want to, when you're available. Tell him to get a hold of me, and if I can make it work, I'd gladly be on the show. I've done a 3-person show before. Wouldn't mind doing another one. I'm always up for being on the podcast. The only reason it was a horse race was because they made it a horse race. That's what I mean. That's what I'm saying. They wanted the polls to say it was close. The polls said it was close all the way. And they purposely didn't cover or gloss over a bunch of what was going on. Even though from the outside it looked abundantly clear, even with what they were covering, how bad Donald Trump was. The media didn't just cover it right. They weren't working in our best interest. They wanted you glued into their channel. And I'm not going to give them the benefit of my views, you know. They're not even sure if there's going to be a tariff on Trump Bibles. Well, see, that's the other thing that they're not talking about. Apparently, it's not going to be just a blanket tariff. There's going to be some exceptions and things that, you know, certain people bring in and apparently certain companies bring in might be exempted. But from what I'm hearing, it sounds like it's going to be people that are, you know, loyal to Donald Trump that are going to get those exemptions. And it wouldn't surprise me if Trump gives himself an exemption for those Bibles. Selling $60 Bibles. Man's probably never read the Bible. I bet you he couldn't quote one passage out of that Bible anywhere. Not one. I mean, let's see. Even if Trump's tariffs don't all pass, it's still going to make an impact on the economy. Oh yeah, definitely, and it's already having an impact. This Christmas season is going to be worse because you're already hearing about places saying, "Hey, no more raises the rest of the year. In some cases, no Christmas bonuses." And they're saying, "Hey, we got to shore up and we got to prepare." And people are looking at their own pocketbooks going, "Oh, fuck, what did we do?" As a registered Republican who did not vote for him, you are spot on. I am neither. I am a registered independent, mostly because I thought that was going to exempt me from getting a bunch of the political mailers and things. But I have voted Republican, Democrat, and Independent. And, I usually listen to policies, although lately one side has had way more policies than the other. Or at least policies that are beyond catchphrases and things that can't really happen. But yeah, Donald Trump's tariffs are going to hurt the economy. That's already been guaranteed. Now, some of them he's going to have trouble with because, like, he pulled us out of NAFTA when he was president last time, which was the North American Free Trade Agreement that had been put in place by Clinton. He pulled us out of NAFTA, said he could renegotiate a better deal for us, and renegotiated basically NAFTA with a new name, and he can say, look what I got us. Effectively, it didn't change anything. But that prevents him from putting tariffs on anything coming out of Mexico. So is he going to pull us out of the trade agreement that he agreed to, saying, and going to say, well, that's a bad deal? Like, I don't even know if he's going to do any sort of tariffs that way out of Mexico, especially if somebody explains it to him that, well, you'd look stupid by saying that the trade agreement you negotiated was a bad deal. His ego may not let him back out of that trade agreement. They are talking about, like, with the immigration thing and everything. I had this thought. Maybe I'm crazy here, but is it possible? Because we know what they want to do with immigration and mass deportations and stuff is going to be very costly. Is it possible that they come out and say, hey, I've named this person as head of immigration, we're going to get to work and round up all the people who shouldn't be here, etc., and we're going to get it done. Wait about 6 weeks, come back out and say, because of our efforts, we succeeded. Everybody who was here illegally is gone. Actually did nothing and just say they fixed it. And have people go, it's fixed. And at least some of the Trump base would go, oh, yeah, they fixed it. And look, clearly it's better now. Look at what some of the Trump base did with grocery prices and the economy and stuff. Day after the election, after he gets declared the winner, they start looking around going, well, look at how great the economy is. Gas prices are down, egg prices are down. And just because they had the perception that it was all because Trump had been reelected. So is it possible that they just do the bare minimum and make them believe, what it could cost? Jay Spears says they have no clue what his plan is going to cost. The man bankrupted the casino, so twice actually. And how do you bankrupt a casino? Those places literally print money. I mean, I love gambling, love going to casinos, and I've sat there and I've watched people lose and lose and lose and lose, and dig in their pocket and lose some more, and gamble away, thousands of dollars in an hour. And that was one person in one casino at one table. And we all have, anybody who's been to a casino probably has an anecdotal story of that, of somebody they saw putting in hundreds and thousands. And casinos should almost be impossible to bankrupt. I do know with his bankrupting the Trump Taj Mahal in Atlantic City, part of it had to do with his engineers and his planners, and everybody told him they could only support a casino floor of so big and a hotel of so big and still be profitable and make the amount of money he wanted to make, and it wasn't going to be the biggest property on Atlantic City. And he ends up building bigger and goes ahead and goes bankrupt. Google Golden Dragon Las Vegas. Is that one that went bankrupt? But now Donald Trump has Trump International in Vegas, and the Nevada Gaming Commission, because of how bad he treated his casinos in Atlantic City, they won't give him a gambling license. He can't operate a casino inside Vegas because they know of how bad it would be. Take that for what it's worth. Was watching some clips of Obama and Mitt Romney debating, and Obama and McCain debating. And I miss that. I miss politics being civil. Jay says he also didn't pay all of the illegals as he was building those casinos. He's notorious for that. He's notorious for going to a company, getting a bid, hiring them to do some work. When the bid comes in, not paying and telling them, well, take me to court, and drawing it out long enough that they accept pennies on the dollar, or just writing it off entirely, or they go out of business. He would rather pay a lawyer than he would pay his bills, which makes no sense. When he was running in 2016, I was talking to somebody here in Iowa, and I said, I didn't mention Trump's name, and I said, if you had a businessman in your town who was building properties, building apartments, and went to different construction companies, got them to pay, got them to build it, didn't pay them for the materials, didn't pay them for labor, went to the furniture store, got all their stuff in, did everything they needed, cabinets, all of it, and then never paid anybody and stiffed them on the bill. How long would your little town let him continue to do stuff like that before they ran him out of town on a rail? And they went, oh, he'd be out of town shortly. We wouldn't put up with it. Nobody'd do business with him. I described Donald Trump, and they didn't like the idea. But when you describe Donald Trump, he's a genius and a brilliant businessman. It doesn't make sense. I think Jay says he runs a business that's been very successful under this administration. I think a lot of businesses have been, by judging from the stock market, judging from GDP, the big numbers, the big economic numbers. The problem is a lot of regular voters don't look at the overarching numbers. They look at kitchen table issues. They look at household issues, and especially certain things, like they haven't ran the Subway $5 footlong consistently since 2005, but people still remember Subway for a $5 footlong and complain when they're now 15. And that's the problem. When they go to vote, they're like, oh, well, see, subs are 15, they used to be 5. It wasn't that long ago they were 5. That's part of the reason people vote the way they do. They really don't remember how long ago some of this stuff actually happened. Still surprised by, some of the Google searches I'm hearing about afterward. I'm hearing about people having actual conversations. Now that the election's over, and they got 2 years before they got to, deal with their favorite political team, because a lot of people use politics like a sports team. They're actually starting to question some of what's going on. I think for a lot of them, they would rather hear the hate because it makes them feel superior. Yeah, what was it? LBJ's quote that said, if you can convince the poorest white man that he is doing better than the richest black man, you can control him forever, or something like that. It was something along those lines, was a quote by LBJ, that you can sow the division if you can convince, if you can always convince them about the other, that they're doing better than that other person. That's why you had Latinos for Trump. You had a group of Latino people, and I'm not one of them. I'm only going by what I'm seeing. Other people who are in the community break it down. I want to clarify that. That they got their citizenship, and then they feel superior to those that don't have it or have to cross illegally or are sitting on a green card or whatever. What Google searches have I heard about? People Googling what's a tariff? What does the Department of Education do? How do I change my vote? Things like that. People asking now, after they've already voted for the guy who wants to put tariffs on things, actually looking into what a tariff does. And then being shocked when they find out that it's not a tax that's paid by the foreign country. It gets paid by the company at the dock when that product lands on American soil, and it just gets roped into the cost and we have to pay it. It's like we were saying it for months and months, and economists were saying it for months, and we kept being told that we didn't know what we were talking about. The economists were being told, well, you're only saying it because you don't know what Donald Trump knows what he's talking about. He's a successful businessman. How would he not know what he's talking about? When you have people who are in the field of economics saying they don't work that way. People asking now, like I said, how did they change their vote? And they can't. There's nothing you can do now to change your vote. The only thing you can do is vote again in 2 years in the midterms. And for those people who now regret voting for Donald Trump, hopefully they vote for Democrats in the midterms, put some guardrails on Congress so they can reel in a president. Talked about it earlier. I'll talk about it again. We had Marco Rubio, senator from Florida. He sounds like he will be Secretary of State, which means he could potentially be a 2028 candidate for president for the Republicans. Because why else would a senator from a roughly safe state of Florida leave his position, not seek re-election, and end up taking a position in the cabinet, if not to further his career as a politician? Now that would be assuming J.D. Vance doesn't run, because if Vance runs, assuming he's still president or vice president, more usually what happens is when the VP runs, it's not contested by the rest of the party. They treat it like when the incumbent runs, like what Joe Biden was going to do. There typically isn't anybody in the primary, and they go from there. Pete Buttigieg 2028 could be. Mayor Pete would be a good option. I've said numerous times that the Democrats have a deep bench of people they can run in 2028. Gavin Newsom, Pete Buttigieg. You have somebody said Tim Walz, Governor Shapiro, Amy Klobuchar, AOC, Hakeem Jeffries. There's a lot of options coming out of the Democrats who are kind of well known, and the big thing is a lot of the ones that could run are younger. Which would be a good thing. I think we need to get some youth back into our politics. We have progressively been aging, and that's not a good thing. Look, Donald Trump is older, and so is Joe Biden, than Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton was president, from January 20th, 1993 to 2001. Jay says, Pete is young, smart, and does not play partisan politics. Straight to the point. Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of what we need. A lot of people um, thinking about, when I was talking about Clinton for a minute, a lot of people I remember at the time didn't like Bill Clinton because he was what they called a fair weather politician. He flip flopped on a lot of issues. He was going, he would harden or soften his stance on varying issues based on polls, especially the Gallup poll. But if you're using those, and if they at the time they were much better than they are now, he kind of had his thumb on the pulse of the country, and he was able to kind of shape policy around what people were wanting. That's kind of what you would want. But Pete being younger, smarter, that's definitely going to be a good thing. We don't need partisan politics. That was one of the things I liked about Joe Biden. Joe Biden knew how the politics game was played. Politics works differently than a lot of other things. It's not a game of I want everything I want and you're going to give me everything I want, or I'm going to take my ball and go home. Politics is a game of give and take. It always has been. It's you vote for this for me, I vote for that for you. You know, and there's some partisan stuff where you try to vote down your party line, especially on major things that, you know, if you have the White House that your president wants, especially if you think they're good for the country. But there's a lot of horse trading going on in politics, and we need to get back to that. There was a lot of stuff that used to always be bipartisan, and it wasn't a fight every time it came around. Up until Donald Trump, basically, or maybe it was Obama, one of the two, debt limit would come up. It was a rubber stamp. Debt limit just got approved. Things like that. It was never we should just not pay our bills and let the government go over the cliff. That was never discussed. It just got rubber stamped with like 90% congressional support. Obama was the beginning of leaving some behind. Yeah. One of the I was a big Obama fan, and the problem we had with Obama wasn't necessarily that he left things behind. It was the bipartisanship stopped with Obama in a lot of ways. You had Republicans who turned around and said, well, we're going to make sure he's a one-term president and not pass any of his agenda, and they dug their heels in and went from there. And now both sides are playing that exact game of we're going to dig our heels in. I mean, the Obama years, we got some good things out of the Obama years. We could have gotten more. I wish they would have codified Roe v. Wade during the Obama administration. They had an opportunity. Wasn't a very large opportunity, but they had one. But Democrats said it's never Roe v. Wade's never going to get overturned, and felt it was safe, so they didn't overturn it. Or they didn't codify it. Probably the best thing we got out of the Obama administration was the Affordable Care Act. Jay says Obama was the cause of the MAGA movement at no fault of his own. Yeah, you're right. MAGA was born out of the Tea Party, which was born as a resistance to Obama. TK says, and lots of deportations. What are you talking about? Um, Obama directly led to the rise of the MAGA movement because, how dare we have the audacity to elect a black man to president? Obama deported more than Trump. Could be. I don't know the exact numbers on that. But I also know Obama didn't run on a platform of deporting people and denaturalizing people and ending birthright citizenship. And a lot of us, have our citizenship because we were born here, or our children have citizenship because they were born here, and they're considered they're considered natural born citizens because they were born here, and now they're talking about wanting to do away with that. Yeah. What amazes me is they win, and they are some of the angriest winners I've ever seen. Um, you know, it's weird. The MAGA movement, they come in, they're mad. Have you noticed that? The MAGA people, they're really mad that Trump won. They're mad everywhere. Most Democrats or left leaning people or Kamala supporters have said, yeah, it's over. Trump won. Free, fair election. We're not fighting it. We're not yelling. We're not screaming. We're not going to be storming the Capitol. None of that stuff. A couple of peaceful protest marches that were exactly that, peaceful, with no arrests, none of that, no violence, no looting, no damage. And they're angry. And is it that they're angry because, they look foolish for how they acted when their guy lost? Is that part of it? Or are they angry because they realize that his policies aren't going to work and that now he has to live up to them, or they're going to look stupid because he didn't hold up to them? Or is it because now they don't have anything to be the victim about? Because they love playing the victim too. You know? Uh, One thing that and I grew up very religious. I grew up in a Christian home. As they hijack Christianity for their political purpose, they don't know. Yeah, that's true. That's kind of what I was getting to. Um, uh, I grew up in a very religious household. And that being said, there was always this air of, we'd always hear about how we were the silent majority and we had to stand up for what we believed in over everybody else and make sure that our beliefs were always the one at the top. Um, they, the Christian right in this country has a mentality that by bringing somebody else equal to them, they somehow lose something. And I have never understood that idea. This this idea that if you bring somebody else up, so everybody's equal, you've lost something. Well, the only thing you lost was your superiority. Is that what you wanted to keep? Is that what they were hoping to keep? I don't know. Jay says, I was a conservative Christian who voted for him the first time until you grew up. Yeah, I kind of feel that way about myself. I voted in the first presidential election that I could. I voted for W over, wasn't Gore, John Kerry. From Minnesota. Yep, that is the Republican way. Yeah, exactly. They have this idea that if they bring somebody else equal, that they lose something. I've never understood that mentality. Um, Lost my train of thought. Um, no, Democrats got to figure out what to do going forward. We got midterms. We're going to have special elections coming up. And it is entirely possible with certain members of the Republican House of Representatives, if they have the House, which we still don't know. Last I saw, they had 214 seats, with something like 18 left to call. For all we know, Democrats could have the House, Republicans could have a thin majority. Either way, if they pull too many members of the House out to fill cabinet positions, Democrats could attack those seats and flip some seats and maybe have control of the House at least. Jay says Bush and Reagan wouldn't even have anything to do with the MAGA movement. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I was thinking about this earlier. By modern standards, Lincoln would be a Democrat. Teddy Roosevelt would be a Democrat. Bush and Reagan, they would probably end up getting pushed out of the Republican Party as rhinos. I don't know if they would end up falling under the Democratic umbrella, but they would at least be independents. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt was a president who expanded the national forest, like the national parks and things like that. It was all about conserving nature. And yeah, it expanded the government at the idea of conserving things for future generations and making sure we had beautiful places in nature. And Donald Trump wants to open up those lands to make tent cities and, homeless camps and drill baby drill. Teddy Roosevelt would speak softly at Donald Trump and whack him with his big stick. They were never hateful, and by Trump's standards, it's proud to be hateful. Yeah, exactly. Um, I can't remember the exact speech that Reagan gave. It was one of the last ones he gave as president, where he read a letter and he was talking about the American dream of anybody being able to come here and become an American citizen, and how just because you move to these foreign countries, you might get citizenship, but you're not going to be their nationality. Whereas anybody can come here and be American. And it was a great speech. And something like that doesn't stand in the MAGA movement. They hate that ideology entirely. They have forgotten where we came from as a country. Absolutely, they hate anything as long as it makes them feel super superior. Yeah, exactly. I mean, the other thing about uh, MAGA Republicans Says, not at all. Come here legally and you're fine. We're a nation of immigrants, legal immigrants. Except the problem is, they have already talked about denaturalizing a bunch of people who came here legally who are American citizens, and they want to ship them out. They've also talked about ending birthright citizenship, which is the citizenship you get from being born here on American soil. And they haven't said what that would entail, of how they would replace that. And when you tell them exactly what's going to happen, they don't believe you. Um, Now, those things probably aren't going to come to pass. Denaturalizing the numbers that they're talking about would take Congress. I've talked about it a couple times in this live. I don't think they've got the numbers. Same with ending birthright citizenship. Would probably take a constitutional amendment. And I know they don't have the numbers for that. So at least a couple of those things are going to be safe. But we've always been a nation of immigrants, not all of them legal. I mean, at one point, there were programs in this country when we were looking for people to come in. It was show up, we'll let you in, and we will give you, so much land in the territories. Native Americans would agree. What? That they hate everybody? That the MAGA people hate everybody? Yeah. There was a time when you had, when some of the property in the territories were trying to be settled, in the 1800s, as we had all of this land and not nearly enough people for it. All you had to do was show up, and they would tell you what area you're heading to, which territory, and you go out that way. You could claim up to so much land yourself, and there you go. You could make your own little homestead, have a farm, and build a house, etc. You became a citizen. We've forgotten that. We've forgotten that we came from immigrants. We used to welcome everybody in. But now immigration has become so hard to do. You have some of the stuff gets tied up in courts for 10 years. And thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. You're asking, in some cases, especially the asylum seekers who have next to nothing, they get it drawn out for 10 years, tell them they're not supposed to do this, not supposed to do that. In some cases can't work. They're not supposed to be able to make any money, but it could take 10 years to get all that approved. And, it might also cost you some money at the end. Well, how does that all work? They need to fix that system. They need to fix the immigration system. And part of the way to do it is by the government putting money into the system to get more judges, to get more, agents on the border, more people, push these cases through, more caseworkers, so people don't come in, get given a case number, etc., and get lost in the system. It should be a quick process. But we've made it such a hard process because everything is so underfunded. Was watching a live talking about from somebody else, maybe it was a video, one of the two, and they were talking about undocumented migrants being paid under the table, being paid cash. Well, this creator made a good point that that's not happening, not nearly on the level you think it is, because if you draw out too much cash at any given time for too long of a time, the IRS is going to flag your account, and they're going to have words for you. Banks are going to be, because of how integrated everything is, the bank's going to have to tell the IRS you're taking out this much cash because it looks suspicious, and then they're going to tell the bank you get no more cash. So, There's issues all the way around. Um, Now, I know some people are getting excited or holding their hat out for recounts, things like that. Apparently, there are some states doing some recounts, looking at state races, etc. Um, I'm not holding out any hope that it's going to change the federal elections and the presidential election until I see something that says it changed it. I don't want to get my hopes up just to have them destroyed. I'm not seeing anything saying they are specifically looking at recounting all the states for Kamala Harris. But if something happens, that'd be great. If it changes the outcome, if they do a recount and it changes something, that would be great. Because these results, they are not finalized until each state. There's dates in December. I don't know what. Every state has a different date where they have to certify their own results before sending them off to DC for the nationwide certification. Honestly, don't know how Trump at age 78 will have the energy unlike his first term. Exactly. He's going to be much more interested in golfing. Expect him to spend more time at Mar-a-Lago. I don't think he wanted to win. I really don't, especially judging by how low energy he was by the end of the campaign. I really think what he wanted to do was he wanted to go into this election. I think he wanted to lose. And then when he lost, he was going to complain and whine and cry that it was stolen. And then he was going to say, well, since they stole it from me, I guess I got no choice. I'm going to run in 2028 and use being a candidate to try to push off his legal stuff. I think that's all he wanted. I don't think he actually wanted to do the job. I think that might be in part why he's been so quiet lately. We're hearing bits and pieces, but he's not doing a victory lap like you would expect. I don't think he wanted to win. I really don't. I think it was all about continuing to gain money, continuing to run as a candidate to push out his trials without actually having to do the job of being president. I mean, if you watched him talk at his rallies, he's not going to make 4 years. I just don't think he stays president all the way to 2028. I would be almost willing to put money down that J.D. Vance becomes president between here and there. Now, whether they use the 25th Amendment or not, I don't know. They could use the 25th. Problem is, Donald Trump is going to put nothing but yes men in his cabinet, yes men and women. And they are going to need to be loyal to him. So are they going to put, country over party, especially if he gets bad enough? We'll have to see. Tina says, I do think his running was a ploy to avoid prosecution. Oh, it definitely was. 100%. That's why he announced about now 2 years ago. It was about this far, maybe even a couple days sooner after the 2020 or 2022 midterms that he said he was running for president. Because he wanted to go into all of his cases and saying, I'm a candidate. Do you see Vance being just as crazy as Trump? No. In fact, I think if they get rid of Donald Trump, it wouldn't surprise me if some of the crazy, stupid shit that Donald Trump wants to do, that moderate minded or, normal-minded people realize are bad, especially like the tariffs, that they get dropped almost immediately. I think I think Vance would end up pulling the trigger. Um, Ginger Snap says not getting rid of Trump. Sorry. Well, what I was saying is J.D. Vance would, if he ends up president, you know, change some of that. And what I'm saying by getting rid of Trump is if his mental health is bad enough, if his physical health is bad enough, or if he just dies. I mean, he is 78 years old. That is something to consider. I said the same thing about Joe Biden when he got elected 4 years ago. He is 78 years old. Taking care of a couple things here, since I don't have a moderator. Um, but he's 78 years old. Donald Trump is 78. I said the same thing about Joe Biden. He is 78 years old. Even if you are in good health, we've all known people who appeared to be in good health at that age and just something happened. You know? That is entirely possible that at 78 years old something happens to Donald Trump and he ends up, you know, passing. And we end up with President Vance. And I think J.D. Vance, and if they still have a Republican majority, will, you know, do what they can, but they're also going to be smarter about what they do. And they are going to do things that might be bad, but not as overtly bad and as overtly stupid as some of what Donald Trump wants to do. They're more worried about getting reelected and continuing power than they are doing some of the stupid stuff. You know, I said earlier we were talking about the mass deportations they want to do, and was saying that is it possible that they just say they did them under the Trump administration? Tina says, honestly, there should be a strict age cap. Nobody over 70 should be running for any office. Not a bad plan. I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you. And the problem with that, just like Vance being seriously unqualified, is per the Constitution, as far as the president and the vice president go, there are only two requirements. Well, technically three. You must be 35 years old and a natural born citizen of the United States and not be term limited out. That's it. Those are the current requirements. It would take a constitutional amendment for there to be any sort of age limits on political positions. And you would be more likely to see an age limit put on the presidency before one that would include senators and members of the House. I would love to see an age limit put on on senators. That would get rid of Chuck, I'm older than chocolate chip cookies Grassley. That man has been a senator longer than I have been alive. And there just comes a point when we shouldn't be wheeling out these people to continue to do what they do at that age. Look at, she was a great senator, but look at Dianne Feinstein. You know, she passed away as a senator, trying to finish out her term to make it to this past election to be replaced. Wasn't going to run for re-election. Her daughter actually had gotten power of attorney and was controlling all of her finances because she was deemed by a court to be unable to control her own finances, but somehow she was still able to be considered with it enough to vote on legislation. That doesn't make any sense to me. Joseph saying power-hungry elites. Yeah, that makes sense. Vance being a puppet of the Heritage Foundation, probably. More likely he was an appointee of Peter Thiel and the Tech Bros. He might have something to do with Heritage. I think he is tied to Heritage too, but I think it's more about him being with the Tech Bros. They want to try to do what they can to switch people over to things like crypto and help out the tech industry, things like that. But the whole thing I was saying with Dianne Feinstein, she was deemed by a court to not be able to be in charge of her own money. But somehow she was still voting on legislation. And then they would wheel her out. She was in a wheelchair. They would bring her in for a vote. And a couple of different times, all she would have to do is say yes or no for whatever vote. And she would start preaching, basically, about the bill. She would start trying to debate something. And she would have to be told which way to vote on the bill. We need to have age limits on our Congress people. They need to have limits. I think if they're old enough to draw full Social Security, they shouldn't be in office. We start talking about people our own, in our own jobs and careers and things like that, retiring at that point, and telling our loved ones that, hey, you're approaching retirement age. Why should it be different if you are a politician? Part of the problem is, we haven't got enough younger people pushing through. Age cap and mental health checks should definitely be requirements. Yeah, I agree, Tina. Joseph says Bernie just won another term at 83. That's my point. And this isn't a knock on Bernie Sanders, but he's 83 years old. And he is pushing quite a liberal agenda, and people love him. But he's also 83 years old. Something could happen at any point now. I mean, you have Chuck I'm older than chocolate chip cookies Grassley, who I think is in his 90s and is going to be running for re-election in 2028. I think it's 28 that he runs for re-election. He's already filed the paperwork. Why are these people in their 80s and 90s still running for office? In part, younger people are not as interested in stepping up and running for politics. At least that's what it feels like. And a lot of the people need to wake up and vote them out. We have the power to vote them out. Problem is, with the way our system works, Joseph, is unless they get primaried by somebody in their own party, you typically don't run a challenger to somebody in your own party in a primary. So they go unopposed into the general. And then if you want to vote them out and make a statement, then you're voting in the other party. You're voting in a Republican. Well, that doesn't help you either. It's a simple matter of taking the help you can get versus, voting in somebody younger. We need younger people to take more of an interest and start working toward running candidates and entering politics. That would help too. We also need to do more in organizing. Too many races run unopposed, especially state house races. I don't know how many races here in Iowa I was kind of looking through. Republican wins, unopposed, 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 unopposed. Democrat didn't even put up a fight. Didn't even try. Didn't even run an independent. Pandemic happened 1918 to 1920. That would have been the Spanish flu. Great Depression, 1929. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about the Depression. And unfortunately, I was only president that we've ever had. Herbert Hoover was president during the stock market crash in 1929. And he sat back and said a lot of things that modern Republicans like to talk about. You know, we don't want to regulate. It's the free market. It'll fix itself. Hands off. They stayed hands off, and then it took a Democrat coming into office in 32 and running on a very liberal agenda and pumping a lot of money into the economy to bring us out of it. And ultimately, it took between that and World War II to fully bring us out of the Depression. And I hope we don't have to go through that entire cycle again. Somebody said if World War III starts now, well, after the Trump presidency and we get involved, guarantee we wouldn't be on the Allies this time. And that's a scary thought for the rest of the world, if they're right. As far as the Depression goes, and after the Depression, we got 20 years of Democrats in control in the presidency and Congress, except for 2 years of Truman's term, where Republicans had control, and then immediately it went back for a while, up until Eisenhower. And this could be good for Democrats. We could be staring at something very similar, because Republicans could have to, if this goes as bad as some economists think it could, and as bad as it is looking like it might, this term could be really bad for Republicans and them just not having much of a voice for a while. We've been going about an hour and a half so far. I'll probably go for a while yet, as long as people want to continue to talk. Yeah, that's what I see might happen with looking at this. You're talking about having Democrats in charge for a while? Yeah, I mean, all you can do is look back at history and say this is what you see. It's definitely a possibility. It's going to be a hard lesson that some people are going to have to learn. And when they learn that lesson, you know, they're probably not going to be siding with the side they were with before. You know, one of the problems we currently have, and I can't wait for us to get back to more nonpartisan politics. Back when politics was boring, used to be, you know, you could be civil to each other. They didn't learn their lesson from 2020, instead embraced conspiracy. Yeah. That was part of it. 2020, you know, he did the same thing going into 2020. Well, if I lose, it's all rigged against me. Then he lost, which made him look like a genius. Made him look right because he lost. So then when he kept saying it was rigged, they're like, well, see, he said the only way he could lose is if it was rigged. and then he lost, so it must be rigged. That's like the you see some of the mentalist people reading a room trying to figure out uh, you know something. Oh, is there anybody in the room whose name starts with J? And kind of just throws these vague generic things out enough till they get close enough, and then they just start building off the room, and then people are like, oh man, they're so great. He was doing that kind of stuff, and people bought onto it with well, he kept saying it was going to be rigged, and then suddenly he lost. Well, it must have been. It's the same kind of trick. It's a parlor trick. He said that the 2016 Iowa caucuses were rigged when he didn't win. He said how many award shows were rigged when he didn't win. He said 2016 elections were rigged going into it. He said, well, if I lose to Hillary, it's rigged. Once he won, you didn't hear a word about the cheating. Funny, we're not hearing anything about undocumented immigrants voting in this election now. They were so worried about it going into the election. Not hearing a word about it, not hearing a peep now, because Donald Trump won. Now they're not talking about it. Just like we're not hearing, if these recounts come back, if they are doing recounts, and it comes out that Kamala Harris won, the people that aren't saying anything about the recounts now are going to be the ones saying, oh, those recounts, they did something shady, something shady. And they're the same ones who were screaming for all kinds of recounts and hand recounts and wanted ballots counted by hand ahead of time going into this election. It's ridiculous. But, I mean, now that we've gotten through the weekend, we're about a week away, a week out from this election. Unless something in recounts changes, we just have to pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and keep working our way forward. Prepare for midterms, prepare for 2028. I've talked about it several times. Democrats have a good bench. They've got a ton of good candidates. They could run Kamala Harris again. It would not surprise me if she comes out for the primaries in 2028. Wouldn't surprise me in the least if she's in the primaries. And then there'll be a primary and everything else, and then those people who are mad because she got appointed and not voted in by the primary, they can quit clutching their pearls and feigning righteousness or whatever they were doing. I've said this in several videos, I'll say it again. For those people who are mad about Kamala Harris becoming the nominee, would they still be as mad or would they still be as irritated if Joe Biden had died instead of stepping aside in July? Because then she would have ran the rest of the race anyway, but she would have also been president. Would they have said the same thing? I don't think they would have. We voted for her to be the vice president to finish out the race for Joe Biden if that was the case, like if something were to have happened. And then when he says, okay, I admit it, I'm not running anymore, they're mad that she's running out the rest of the race. That makes no sense. As far as who else could run in 2028, we got Pete Buttigieg, Shapiro out of Pennsylvania, Gavin Newsom. Some people have suggested Tim Walz, Amy Klobuchar, AOC. The bench is deep for Democrats. Very, very deep for who they could run in 2028. Let's see here. So there's a lot we can talk about with who the Democrats might run in 2028 as a candidate, but they've got options. Republicans don't have that option. Republicans looking at their bench, they don't have anybody who can capture the magic that Donald Trump did. You know, um, Donald Trump had a way of getting his base to be 100% loyal to him no matter what he said, no matter what he did, no matter what negative thing came out about him. You could probably list 100 things that Donald Trump has said or done that if any other politician of either party had done would have been a campaign ender. Lost my train of thought for half a second there. But no, look at what was it? Michael Dukakis put the weird hat, the helmet on with Dukakis on it, and came in riding a tank. Destroyed himself in the election. The one guy in the primary in 2016 let out a weird, like, yeah, or a cheer or something. Never heard from him again. There was a Republican. I can't think of the guy's name. In was it the 80s, I think? Came out that he had visited a psychiatrist. His campaign was done. His career was done. I mean, there was it Jeb Bush? And please, was it Jeb Bush? It was somebody who said, like, please clap or something like that after he made a comment. And that was the end of his campaign. Any number of things that Donald Trump had done during this campaign would have been the end of his campaign if he had been anybody else. And Republicans don't have anybody that the general public is going to look at and be willing to just excuse every little thing like they did with Donald Trump. I just don't know who they run in 28. If they crater the economy, they're not going to be able to run Vance or anybody in the Trump administration. You know, if I hope, and I do, I hope that all of the top economists in the world are wrong. Everybody who is looking at it, and all the companies that are forecasting everything, I hope all of them are wrong. And everything Donald Trump has said is going to work and is going to boom the economy and make everything great and do all of it. I hope it all works, because if he's right and everybody else is wrong, I'll admit it. But when 99% of the people are saying what you want to do is going to screw everything up, and you're the only voice saying the other way, doesn't give me a lot of hope. Vance would be a terrible option to run in 28, especially if the economy tanks. And that's what I mean. If the economy craters, especially to the point that, it could, anybody associated with the Donald Trump campaign would be toxic. I mean, we thought Trump himself was going to be toxic, but apparently he wasn't. I know some people are worried that they're going to try to change the Constitution to allow Donald Trump to run a third time. Well, run for a third term or something. They don't have the numbers to pass a constitutional amendment. That would take 2/3 of both chambers of Congress and 3/4 of the states, which is 38 states. So that's not going to happen. They're just not going to be able to do that. But if they were to change it and Donald Trump could run again, that would probably also open the possibility that he could end up running against Barack Obama. If Obama wanted to throw his name into the hat, that would be kind of funny. See a lot of people saying that could be a thing. It'd be hilarious to me. Did see Puerto Rico passed with like 54, 55% support. They want to pursue the next steps of statehood. I don't know if that is going to happen in the next 2 years. I know the next step would be sending it to Congress, and Congress has to approve it. I don't remember by what margins. That they have to approve Puerto Rico's petition, and then it gets sent back to Puerto Rico, where they have to come up with a constitution and start setting everything up, and then prove that they have a viable economy and all sorts of things like that. And then all of that, once that all gets passed and ratified, would go back to Congress and again have to be approved a second time. The one thing I'm not clear on is whether or not the president has to sign it after it passes through Congress, or if it just has to get voted on by Congress. Because if it only needs to be passed in Congress, that could get passed potentially after midterms when Democrats retake the House and Senate. And if Puerto Ricans keep working toward having the rest of it established, the Constitution and everything ready to go, just waiting on congressional support, if all it needs is Congress to approve it, that could come rather quickly after midterms and be done in time for the 2028 general election for president, and that would be interesting, and that would definitely shake things up. I think they would get 5 or 7 members of the House, 2 senators, and because of how they do congressional appointments, those seats would get pulled from other states. Some states would go down. I know California would lose 1 seat in the House, I think. And I'm not sure where they go from there. There's a whole list I've seen online. Somebody else has looked into it as to how they would figure out that proportionment of senators, and then they would take the 2 senators from Puerto Rico, and one of them, they would both get elected the next time, one for a full term, one for a short term, I believe, and they would just get slotted into the next rotation of 6 years for when we elect senators. It will tank terrorist costs of deporting no farm workers. Depression could be coming. Exactly. It really could be. The economy could be in for a very rough time. People do not understand exactly what this all is going to mean. And I don't know what it is with people who, vote Republican. And I hear about it. I come from a red area. I hear about it. Don't want them taking our jobs. And then you start talking about, well, what types of jobs? And they're either silent, or they'll tell you, oh, the farm work or this or it's that. I'm like, do you want to go work those jobs? Well, yeah, if they pay me. And, they want $20, $30 an hour to go do that same job that the farm workers are doing for, a lot less than they deserve. Nobia the Queen says they're talking about replacing money for Bitcoin. That would take Congress, and I don't see that happening. I know they're talking about it, but I don't see it happening because most people don't deal in Bitcoin. Congressional Republicans don't want to, or congressional politicians in general, worry about getting reelected. I would venture to guess that 95 to 98% of the American people don't deal in Bitcoin. A bunch, especially the older folks, I'm assuming, don't know a lot about what Bitcoin even is, don't understand it. I just don't see how they replace American currency for something digital. I mean, they were talking when I graduated high school in the early 2000s about going to digital currency, and we still haven't done it. I'm not that old. Yeah, I don't understand Bitcoin either. I understand it's a digital something, that supposedly is very hard to fake and you can't replicate it and all this and that, and it's supposed to be safer than paper money in a bank account. But beyond that little tidbit that I know about it, I know nothing about it. I don't touch it. I don't deal with it. It seems to me as more of a scammy thing that basically some people got on board as kind of this is kind of a neat thing, and then they convinced a bunch of people that it was actually valuable and skyrocketed it. You know, Vance pushing for mass deportations? I mean, he is as part of the Trump campaign, but I don't know if he would be behind it as much without Trump. You know what I mean? Like, if something were to happen and he had to become president without Donald Trump there, um, would he still be behind him? I don't know. I know Donald Trump has said, as far as like the mass deportations and stuff, a couple of things he wants to do is he wants to get rid of anchor babies. And the funny thing is, I'm pretty sure almost all of his kids are anchor babies. So there's that. Um, they want to end uh, birth tourism, which is already, you know, kind of not a thing. They screen for things like that. And, if you are pregnant when you come over here and you have a child, yeah, you have, they become a citizen and stuff. But, they look at it like, did you end up paying your medical bill? And they really look into it, especially if you've made that trip more than once. Um, and they just start saying, okay, there's issues here, and there already are safeguards. It's like people, like kind of like what they were trying to do with non-citizens voting. They were trying to legislate out a problem that really doesn't exist. All in the name of fear mongering. Trump is the master of birth tourism. He has them at Mar-a-Large. They are from Russia since 1990s. Yeah, that's what I mean. They say and do things like that to where they don't realize they're talking about themselves. I mean, depending on how many generations they want to go back, and say you have to show like 4 generations of American citizenship to be a citizen or whatever, well, Donald Trump would be out because he doesn't have that. His parents were, or his grandparents were immigrants, something like that. Like, none of it makes sense. Like, I just don't see any of it doing it. It was just a way to rile up a bunch of people to get them to turn out to vote. And that's one of the things about politicians. They make a lot of promises that they never intend on carrying out once they get elected. So we've been going almost 2 hours now. Been a really good conversation. Really enjoy doing these lives. It's been helping me kind of process my thoughts. Hopefully, in the next couple days, I'll get back to doing the normal videos I do. More of them. There just hasn't been a lot of good news to talk about or things that, um, you know, are really negative about Trump. I know a lot of us have been down since the devastating loss a week ago. Um, so doing the lives has been kind of a nice change of pace, helping just discuss and get through this grieving process. Tina says it has been a good conversation. It has. And I just try to keep it a conversation, just chat back and forth. Um, I don't do the whole debate thing where I bring on a Trump supporter because you're never going to change their mind. If you haven't noticed in the chat, I've been blocking most of them, even without a moderator, and just getting them out of here because they don't add to the conversation. Not most of them don't, especially the ones that come in and they're still saying Trump 2024. Well, the election's over, so what does that mean? What are you trying to prove? They're trolling. And it's funny. I've been seeing a lot of videos about this where people are having conversations with Trump supporters, and they just say, when they start talking about some of the policies, and they go, "I hope you get everything you voted for." And then the Trump supporter, the MAGAs, get mad. Why is that? Why do they get mad when you say, "I hope you get everything you voted for"? Is it because they realize how bad everything could actually be with what they voted for? Maybe. It's possible. Ooh, excuse me. So it's getting to be Nobia says because they think they are exempt. They do. It's the idea of the other. That they're better than somebody else. I know we've all probably seen the video of the one African American MAGA supporter saying that, he loves MAGA Nation, things like that. But they told him now that the election's over, that he's not part of them and he was just a vote. And he's all upset that, why would they say that to me? Why would they tell me that? Why would they say I'm just a vote? And they realize, they're already getting burnt by some of their own policies, some of their own practices. But they think they're exempt from some of it. Okay, well, I think I am going to start wrapping this up. I want to thank everybody who took the time to join. I know some of you guys have been here quite a long time, as we would have in this very, very good conversation. If you came in later and you want to catch the rest of it, as I say when I end up all my lives, it will be up at some point later over on my YouTube page. I am Analytical Iowan over on YouTube. Whenever it gets around to doing whatever it does to upload. Sometimes it gets picky with YouTube. And then also over there, I've got all my TikToks. Obviously, they're here on TikTok as well. And I have my government answers page where I have some questions to government, confusions that I see around here on TikTok and in other people's videos and stuff like that. So I hope you guys check it out. If you want to, probably doing more of these lives. Never intended to go a week straight after this election, but here we are. And I will catch you guys later. All right, for those of you over here on YouTube, I have wrapped up the live. Good conversation. Didn't have nearly as many trolls as what we've had in the past. So it's a good conversation. I hope you guys all enjoyed it. And I will catch you again later.